Olá, galera, boa noite! Opa, que energia!
Hello, guys. Good evening. What a good energy. I wasn't here, and now I'm here feeling fed again by this wonderful energy of Floop. Let's move on to our next panel. In the comfort of my shell. The shell is that place that allows us to protect ourselves from the world, from the others, and from all sorts of violence. It's also a place to where we can reach our true self, something that is ours, solely ours. What literature can only ourselves do? From starting with that thing that is particularly ours. In the comfort of our shell, let's receive the winner of the Concours Prizes 2019, and Marina Sena, author of The Revenge is Mine, released this year in Brazil, Mahini Jai. Where's Mahi? An applause to her. And while she's arriving here, we have the acclaimed author of the acclaimed book, winner of the São Paulo Prize for Literature 2024, Luciane Aparecida Elu. And who will come into this shell? The also awarded writer, who I am proud to say who is also my friend, Eliane Alves Cruz, who received in 2022 the prize Jabuti for his tale books. Do you want to be in the comfort of this shell as well? I do. So let's thank the French embassy who supported Mahi's coming to Floop. And let's come to these wonderful women. I've already called you. I've already invited you. The paths are open. Please occupy this territory. My beloved friends, thank you. Good evening to everyone. Oh, hold on. We need our phones for the simultaneous interpretation. I don't speak French, unfortunately. Bom, isso vai cedo, né? Então talvez termine umas 9h e pouca. Eu queria ver a música, mas já tem show. One minute, we're dealing with technical issues. Será que eu... Cliquei. Agora eu tô pensando. Será que cliquei? Misericórdia. Ele deve ser aqui. Now, yes. Once more, good night. All of you, good evening. Thank you for your presence here. This is the last roundtable today. It's a pleasure to be with Marina Gay and Luciene Aparecida, two huge writers, and I need to say that this flip is historical. We had never had in this country so many women, powerful, talented, awarded researchers were here in a literary event. So I think this is a small revolution. I think we're all should be very proud, and congratulations to all of us, and so many applauses to our guests and to you that are here this Thursday. I think we've had a brief introduction about our guests, but I'd like to speak a little bit about them because the previous roundtable was receiving researchers, people highly fluid in so many issues because they've studied them in universities abroad. This panel is made by fictionists, novelists, and they write because they love literature, not necessarily because the fact that this literature was, boosted in university, started in university. So this is so interesting, and it is a unique experience to share with you, to be shared with you. Marine Nadier is one of the greatest names of the contemporary literature in France. She was awarded because of her novel, Three Powerful Women. She published it since she was 16 years old when she delivered the originals of her book to three publishing houses. And since then, she started to be published. And from that moment on, she produces a lot, many novels, theater plays. She's daughter to a Senegalese father and French mother. Marie is today an author, very relevant the French literature. Luciane was born in the Vale do Rio Jiquiriçá in Bahia, is a researcher, writer of novels, plays, poems. She has just been awarded with the São Paulo Prize for Literature. And Luciane wrote her PhD thesis, approved with distinction in 2010, about the work of Ricardo Aleixo. So both of you have theater in common. Then Matadossi arrived, and the rest is history, we know. So I'd like to start asking you first for Marie. You started to write and publish at the age of 16. I'd like you to elaborate on this beginning as writer from the following perspective. The right to mature as artists, because to publish since you were 16 and have such a vast production makes so that you are an artist that exercises, that practices the writing not as a form, not only the content and also the form. So let's see if it works. I hope it works now, right? Reformulating. Marie, you've been publishing since you were 16, so I'd like to know from you, how was it that you matured as a writer in time? How was it to exercise your writing in terms of form and content? Mahi at 16 is not Mahi right now. How was this journey? It's a chance of people getting to know more about you. And the same to Luciani, who also has a vast production, but is in the academia and university, so it's different when you look at from both perspectives, as a writer and as a someone who's criticizing, someone who's making reviews on works. So please, Mahi. I started to publish, and I have it's been there's a problem with the volume of the speaker. It truly, it's the way I was writing and how I was writing in 15 and at 15 and 20 years when I was 15, 20 years old. It's very different from how I write now, right now, and for a series of reasons, whether be it the fact that now I have life experience that I didn't have back then at 18, 20 years old, of course, but the life experience, my life experience feeds my novels, especially what changes is that all the novels that I've read, all the novels that transformed me, that fed me and influenced me, they influenced the way I write, the form, in terms of the writer I am now. And this is very different from when I started when I was 16, 17, always with this desire, this determination, trying to say something to the world through literature. Good night, good evening. I think this flute is really special, remarkable. It's the first one I take part at. Uh, this flute has been going on for a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to create it. And I'm moved, I'm touched to see how you are all here. It's very special. And I'm also very moved by the fact that I'm with you, Eliana. I love your writings. The literary writing happens first, and obviously with the publication. But in Brazil, it means a lot of things. It's a place of access, and when we have to understand ourselves as writers from the place of a person who can publish. And also about how the society categorizes us until the moment we can actually take over this place, possess this place. I come from the university, as Eliana said, and even so, it was so slowly and so hard to decide to say that I am a writer. I was already discussing my PhD thesis, and I could never say to people that I, am a writer. I've been coming from this internal process of writing. I had already 6 books, concluded, and I was, publishing those books. I come from a rural community in the country or countryside of Bahia, so I was still, datilographing the books in a unique volume. But I was still typing, but I didn't understand that process was, confirming me as a writer. And only when I started to read Negras, Black women, that I understood that I was a writer. So I think in Brazil we still have complex issues regarding race, gender, classes, in terms of the access to reading itself. a novel wrote by a black woman. It's revolutionary to another black woman. It's a place of revolution. Knowing that your thoughts could, reach somewhere else. It's not simple to live within oppression, and even so, even in the midst of oppression and other struggles, stand up and say, I am a writer in a society that, devalues everything that we do and say and think about the world. So, to write and elaborate a philosophical concept about the world, this is possible. So I start to think that I'm going to write because it's relevant what I have to say. And when I start to read these texts and they start to be published in Brazil, when I read you, Eliana, I think my life has dignity. Today I had the opportunity to speak in person with Juliana Ortiz, who is an Ecuadorian writer here in FLUP. And I told her that how by reading her text, I understand humanity. I think that my life has dignity. When I read a writer such as Lilia Guerra, a candidate for the São Paulo Award, and I told her this week, I got to know her in person. It's fantastic to meet a black writer and say, I wrote a book and your book dignified me. I think you assume this place of writing and publishing, and it's directly connected to this place of seeing, acknowledging that other people write, and it changes your writing. After I published, I am another writer because the mystery is to publish because someone is reading what you wrote, and when someone does it, this person creates a new zone of existence. My recent book, which is Mata Doce, Sweet Forest, it exists now in many places, and people come to me, and I, from that moment, start to constitute myself as a writer from this feedback. This is such a moment for maturity. It changes completely the way you think the writing, you think the text. It's revolutionary to be read. Marie, I had this privilege of in this year, 2024, I was in contact with some authors, French black writers, and I was mediating a roundtable with Garça in Brazil. In Flip panel with Leonora Melno, I talked to Scholastique Musanga, who is from Rwanda and lives in France. Well, Jaga Sebus was in an event. She's Italian, so it's a whole, constellation of writers with in different places, with different ways of thinking, and being a black person in an European continent, and in this continent called Brazil, because we are a continent in terms of dimension, and we are sometimes isolated here. There's this distance because the oceans separate us, and sometimes this is something diffuse. We don't really define it. And I think it's the same maybe for you. Like, what's this country? What are these countries, these people? And this takes me to the discussion of identity. Identity, black identity. And by reading some interviews that you gave, I realized that you have some issues in terms of being placed like a black writer, black woman writer. You like to be called writer, and this is an issue because of our history, because of our political issues, and so on. So tell us more about this. Elaborate your thoughts about this issue of identity, which is something so present in contemporary period, and also in terms of political situation globally. I still feel that I'm in an ambiguous position in terms of this question because, due to my story, I prefer to tell the story of my parents. For instance, in terms of regarding Eleonore Scholastique, she talks about a world that it's very close to her, where their parents come, her parents came from. They were immigrants, and and they're the sons and daughters of the first generation. Her parents were migrants, and this was not my case. For a series of reasons, I didn't know my father, who came from Senegal. I was simply the daughter of my French mother in the 70s and 80s, and I didn't have any reason. Truly, what I want to say is that I didn't have any reason to attach myself to this Senegalese identity that was more connected to the color of my skin, because truly I am biracial. And when I was a kid, friends consider that all kids came from one only republic, and they should not be interested or give value to this thing of origin, nationality. And this was really convenient to me because I was satisfied with the fact that I was seen as a French girl, daughter of the republic, just like the other children. That, that's why I never identified myself as a black writer. I always considered myself a French writer. Who comes from the Republic's school without any color distinction, and mainly without actions related to color. That made no sense to me. And in French literature, the examples were really rare, of black women like Marcia Condé. But I don't have this memory of having had any other model of a black woman writer. This just didn't work for me as a model. And the fact of writing was seen, I saw it as a young French girl that was writing without, thinking about color of her skin.
Muitas questões com isso. Bem, ainda também é ambíguo para nós, porque, ao mesmo tempo que é uma afirmação política, também é algo que, às vezes, limita.
Affirmation. Sometimes it pushes us to a certain place where you are imprisoned. So sometimes we also have issues with this. And I pass the floor to Luciane so that she can elaborate on this place. Because beyond the editorial market, we have issues related to the university in terms of positioning yourself in a place of, a strange position in terms of having a non-standard body. In Brazil, this issue is really complex, different consequences, and we could mention several of them, several opportunities for dialogue. I want to start thinking about what's to write, what's writing, and what's the text in Brazil, and think that this writing can to dialogue, think with a dialogue with a writer that creates a narrative in Brazil. If we think this, it is associated with speaking, with narrating oral stories. It becomes a very sophisticated elaboration. It is developed in Brazil, a country who went through colonization, a very violent process where different people meet, different women, survival, and they elaborate this existence by narrating, telling stories about themselves. And this sophisticates the way you write, the way you think about a story. This is one thing. The other is, if you think about Brazil 2024, what's the literary scene? It's made of the person who writes, the person who writes about who writes, and the person who reads. And for us in this context in Brazil, the author does not identify herself in this or that way, but the literary scene identifies the author from a very specific place, from a place of that bears a risk, And the first structures of this violence is to say that this text does not have aesthetics and categorize the text as, less important. It's just as if we needed, like Conceição Evaristo, elaborate a theoretical structure to teach or to bring an aesthetic alphabetization for people to understand a structure. And it speaks a lot to a country that have an university with few black people. It's recent. It's something that started to happen 10, 20 years ago, the access of black women to university. And I think many situations that makes us think, The fact is that think in Brazil, literature from a black author is to think about the sophistication of the narrative. What we have elaborated in Brazil, in this sense, is huge, immense. Maybe all of us here, and people in their houses and university, maybe we don't have the proper dimension of these things because it's everything so close to us. But there are people who are connected. There are people who have already understood and are attentive. And it speaks to a place of reading with dignity. Because sometimes the literary scene reads the text of a black author and says, this is not valid. Because maybe that person does not understand aesthetically what that theme is. Maybe the person lacks an understanding, a knowledge of the references used by the text. Sometimes people don't understand that maybe the blue color might be referring to an orixá instead of the sky. So we are living a moment right now when this is really amplified, because in Brazil we might think that we have a tradition of novelists, black novelists. Eliana was so important to me, reading Defeito de Cor from Ana Maria Gonçalves, books from Conceição Evaristo, Águas de Barrela, Crime do Cais do Valogo from Eliana Cruz. So I think we have a generation in Brazil that now wants not only to be appointed as black authors, but they want to self-affirm as black authors because they want to be affiliated to this tradition that writes characters that have layers of complexity. In my book, there is a character. After 80 years old, read Maria Firmina for the first time. The character is called Maria Teresa. And that alters the perception that she has about reflecting upon her writing and reading. So this is something that a black author brings to that woman, you know. There are at the university, you have many, you know, consequences, many results. You think about black literature, Afro, Brazilian writing, many professors, many researchers that think about it. So as a writer, I think that there are these two lines: the way people accuse us, and if someone is not, you know, doesn't know about it, maybe she may think that she's being undervalued. And I think that this is might be an affirmative, a positive affirmation. And these days I've been talking to someone, I don't remember, in São Paulo, and I said, I am Baiana, and the person said, I, I noticed, and I felt really proud, you know? She noticed one of the best things in my biography, that is being Baiana. So there is this thing about, you know, the thing of beauty, health of the black authoring. You know, it makes a difference in a text. And I think there are many, you know, issues, many waves, many consequences that we could mention here. I really dialogue with history. I think about the historical document, the literature, because that's an authority. When you read one of the plays I wrote about a testament of a black woman in Brazil, and by saying some things in her testament, she's also writing a composition. I want my name to be written in this way. I live here, I don't know what, with the face of a dog, and I don't know what else to someone else. This is black authoring. And if you understand those elements, this is something more sophisticated, and you think of the world, about the world from a different epistemology. We have many waves, and you are walking, oh well. Tension is part of the game, and attention is part of the game. Now, yes, diving into, you know, literature, the writing itself, we and the text, I see that you have something in common, some sort of strangeness. By reading your books, Mahi, I realized that characters, situations are somehow fantastic, you know? Something that is, you know, embarrassing. Luciane, especially O Mata Doce, the book. They are two women, they are a couple, and they are old. You don't see elderly in literature. They have in Brazilian literature, they have a very stigmatized place. You have a displacement, a disruption that is very interesting. And this for you, it's something that you search for, or is organic, or is something that simply flows. I've always searched from the beginning to mix realism and a way of some sort of magic, sweet magic, magic of low intensity, which is, you know, distant, to be distant a little bit from reality, but just a little bit, to show that the characters can have an oniric life that will be also important, and that their lives are real. I've always sought to make so that the dream will in a very sweet way enter the writing, be part of the writing without never telling the dream, actually, because there's nothing more boring than telling dreams, but doing so in a way that what characters could live within their days and nights, their spirit could be introduced little by little in the narrative, in a classical narrative of history. And I see that it's very interesting because to which extent, to which extent, when we are born, and I was born in France, the issue of being black or of being a woman at the end of the day didn't have the same implication that it could be here, that it could have here, because my unique intention when I started to write, and even after, is that they knew, for instance, I like to be a man, a woman, a tree, a rock, and that they didn't know anything about my identity. So by choosing to preserve my name, I was, of course, informing about my identity. But it didn't seem important. And the only thing that seemed important was to tell stories and to say from where they come. And I know that they never come from, they don't come from anywhere. But in France, for instance, when you say race in France, it's hard because it's forbidden. It's hard. And we could never accept within these reviews to to visualize that I could be a black woman. So in France, this was absolutely impossible. It would be considered as racism, ambiguous, etc. And that's why I think that there is an being here is so interesting, because I realized to which extent my story as a writer was different, and or would have been different here because of the point of view you are presenting now. I think I'm I think it's important to think about what's writing. And I think we can follow several paths to think about it. But one of them, I think things are not really separated. I like to think in terms of borders, you know, dream dialoguing with reality. This is fiction, this is reality. Like life, was so divided. I think things are in relation. And from this perspective, when I wrote Mata Doce, I also want to elaborate thoughts about writing. So I thought about putting in the center of this two women that love each other. And I thought it was beautiful, I'm gonna write a book and about two elderly women that who love each other, and I think this is something that this is how you sophisticate writing, how you sophisticate the thoughts of writing. It's something delicate, and not a delicate really in terms of feminine, because one of them is a travesti, a trans old woman. But it's important to me to think about a literature that is in tension and saying yes to life and yes to existence into a possible world. and maybe creating in the head of the reader the desire to go on dreaming. Everyone can read these texts, regardless if you are a woman that loves another woman or an old person. The main character is 92 years old, but a 20-year-old person might read it and feel moved and touched by the text. So I think this is the greatest mystery. This is what literature does. It makes so that we arrive in that story and will be totally emotional with that character, and maybe we are totally different from that character, but it does not prevent us from feeling emotional and crying. But I have a commitment with the literary writing. I am here today, sat here because I said yes to the commitment of women that came before me. I am free in my journey and I look for a position in the world. I come from a place in Brazil, from a social, I'm talking in terms of exclusion, in Brazil. And the hegemonic intellectuality says that I'm not an intellectual. So I decided my elaboration of language wants to dialogue with this. This is my choice as a writer. I want to dialogue with tension, with the border, saying yes to my existence. And this connects me with a group of people that came before me and that paved the way for me here. And I'm saying to which tradition I want to affiliate to. I want to be affiliated to a tradition that will make me feel proud of myself, proud of saying yes to this. I don't want to make things exotic. Maria Firmina dos Reis creates a character that talks about abolitionism when Brazil was as slavery, when Brazil had slavery, and this is revolutionary. So of course, we have this fiction in my book that is fictional side of two women having kids and having a relationship together, and one of them writing a book. And in this moment, I think literature is so powerful. And why? Because it creates imaginaries. It creates imaginaries. It's not because we never read a document saying that these women are loving each other and are free. It doesn't mean that these women cannot exist in reality. I want to believe that they exist, and there are many other people that want to read this text because the art is a place where we rest. We meet art to rest, and this resting can start with this connection of saying yes, there is a wound here, and I'm gonna show it to the world so that it can heal. Mahi, I saw that you said, and this happens to me too, this difficulty in theorizing about what I write. Sometimes I study, I research. Maybe I can create even more sophisticated researches for a book. And sometimes I forget. I researched, I studied, I observed, but then I sit down and forget it because I cannot be tied to that. I have to go to the story and I dig into the story I want to tell. And I heard something you said about you write because you read a lot, you're a reader. So what readings created in you this sensation of wow, this is the place I want to stay, this is where I want to start? What readings are stimulating you today? I'm not talking about a specific book or a specific author, but what type of content attracts you and feeds you as an author? The type of reading that it's not that it gave me the will to write because I already had it, but the one that increased and confirmed this desire was a very classical text for my age, an author that didn't have anything to do with me, Marcel Proust, a writer from the beginning of the 20th century, bourgeois, Jewish, homosexual, sick, that was living closed in his bedroom where he died with less than 50 years old, writing Em Busca do Tempo Perdido, In Search for the Lost Time. And what I found remarkable, without even being conscious of that, is me is that I was a little girl with 15, 16 years old. I was feeling so close to this writer with which I had, you know, theoretical nothing to do with. But what we had in common in the end is that what I felt was the love to the words, to literature, everything that separated us was the time, the period of time, the social issues of that time. We didn't have anything in common as individuals. But this absence of similarities between us was completely abolished by the magical side of literature. And Luciani, what was the reading that made you have this epiphany? There were many, several. I came from a reading family, and when people say that I come from the countryside, they feel it's strange, you know, when I say that my family was a reading family. And I had many books at home, and we need to read more. We need to read the classical and the non-classical, because and I read so much different literatures, Brazilian and non. My grandmother obliged me to read twice a day at 10 a.m. and 16 p.m. And I come from this environment, and it was really exhaustive, you know, this process of reading. And I always like to read the classic texts, and Brazilian literature always moved me more, you know. And I was a student that at school, since people were, you know, people there at school hated to read, and I loved. And it was like a subversion of this reading. And its subversion was very much part of my story. Back in where I lived, there was a school that was a school for citizenship from Don Elder Câmara, tied to at that moment to a movement called Teologia da Libertação, Liberation Theology, and they created a school where children would go in the afternoon after the regular school. So this eyes open to this interdisciplinarity made me so that I started to read literature with an open eye. So when I think about Brazilian literature, the first time I read Guimarães Rosa, I found it fabulous. But I really wanted to have that cam in a hand, showing that structure from another place. And I remember a tale of his. And when I started to read, I shout out to my mother, "Mom, they are talking about us. He's talking about our life." And now I want to tell this story, you know, because I wouldn't have written that sentence in that way. And we come from an intellectuality in Brazil, in which we are seen as exotic, and we have enough intellectuality to realize that. And when you read some text, you realize that they are talking about my body. And it was really funny to read Machado de Assis when I was a teenager. The first time I read, and it was when they started a high school in Santerense, the closest city to my city. I studied there. In this technical school, I accessed different social classes, and I went to the house of a colleague, and she had all the works of Machado de Assis, hardcover, because the books that I had were borrowed. Gabriela Cavre Canela, my grandmother had this book, and she had all the books that she didn't want me to read, Jorge Amada, and they were disguised with a different cover. And then I would pick them and started to read, But and I saw all these books in my colleague's house, and Dona Crimea, so sensible, she realized I wanted to read them, and she asked me, "Do you want to read it? Take it." And I read all of those books. And when I read Memórias Póstumas de Brás Cubas, oh my God, it's wonderful to laugh about these people. It's fantastic. It's fascinating how you can also laugh of these texts about because of this sarcasm, the reading about the social structure is really interesting. So literature keeps me alive. It brought life to me and keeps me alive. And also through vengeance and through sarcasm and irony. These are keys to understand the world, and they mobilize existence with positivity too. And literature also aims at creating zones of sarcasm and irony. And then I thought, I want to write a story like this. I'm holding a camera and I'm telling you about this place, because when you think about Caatinga, the countryside, you think that it's such a, underdeveloped place. And this is me, I'm alive. If you want to touch me, So it means that the countryside, the Kaching, is not something that is behind in time. It exists now. I am here now. Monstella Joshosse, one of our greatest intellectuals, say that our time is here. This is the where we are. This is our time. And in this place, I am also this place that people read as underdeveloped. I am the child that live until 20 years old in a countryside community. This is a perception about life, and it's not evolutive, in terms of evolution. When I read these texts, I understood that they were not advancing in these matters, and I wanted to advance these matters too. That only when I read texts of people that occupy border zones and migration zones, this advance occurs when I write. To create a character, create a narrative structure. What you do in your book, what social imaginaries I have regarding the history of Brazil after I read your book. This is the way you write the character. This is how you write the timing of the narrative. This literature mobilizes me a lot. It's so interesting that you bring Machado and you talk about territory and time, because we are here, and I think this is a very important information for Mahi, who is not Brazilian, but for many people who know we are in a very historical center in Brazil, the so-called city center. This is not the geographical center. This is a place through where the city started. The city of Rio and many other Brazilian cities during so long wanted to be friends. They wanted to be like friends. We had a French invasion. By the way, a French pirate. You know about that story? Wonderful. Pause. Let's pause. There was this French pirate who hijacked the city. He only gave it back after I don't know what sort of reward, But Rio We have many institutions that were created, inspired by France. The Brazilian Academy of Letters, the building, if you go this way ahead, it was a gift from France, that building. That was an exhibition, a French one. And they left the building there and gave it as a gift to the academy. But the institution, the structure is inspired by the French Academy of Letters, just as our OAB of lawyers, in terms also of architecture. And what I want to say is, what's the place of France today? How do you see this country, which is a reference for nations such as Brazil? We don't even speak French here. And it's still an empire nowadays. And how do you observe this conflictuous place, which also possesses very complex issues, and you and other authors in literature, producing literature, how do you see this contemporary side of France? I have the impression that today French sees itself or doesn't see itself anymore actually as nothing in the world, because it cannot see itself more than that when compared to others. But I think that many decades since for many decades we have this nostalgia, not really hidden nostalgia of a time when it didn't have any doubt about itself. And it was a time where France was a reference, as you said, in terms of architecture and more punctual things, specific things around the world. This was the reference. And since the liberation of the colonies, France has never, recomposed itself from its ingenious state, amazed state, in, if compared to the whole world, when compared or in relation to the world. It has this a language that is always less, every year less studied, but it's hard to rise again. It's hard to rise and after some obstacles of the past, and write about the way France today, and it's still sad and melancholic regarding some things that they didn't have the right to have. It was just as if these treasures had escaped from their hands, and France believed they had the treasures, and in reality, these treasures had never been there. So we really to gather yourself and accept that the fact that France and the French language are infinite, small points in terms of the vastity of the world, and in political terms in Europe. Of course, within the European context, France matters, but the path that France is following now represents nothing if compared to the whole world. And I say this, but I never, work with this theme, this issue. I create, characters, and I embed the characters with these themes. And what creates problems in France today is it's the fact that France should wants to be what it will never be, and that it embraces some sort of stories that it thought that it may be, that belonged to her, like stories from Maghreb, from the north of Africa, children and grandchildren, and these countries that were colonies and that are now in France, migrating to France. This is something that cannot be accepted, but that must be embraced with joy and happiness and simplicity. Uh, I see that you won the Concours Award and you presided. Can you hear me? You were awarded with the Concours Award and you presided the prize, the award, and the commission that was created in Brazil for the Concours. And how was this moment, because we're gonna talk about prizes now, because this moment prizes is really intimately connected with this editorial success and with the notion of success. So how it is to be part of this prize as a winner, and as someone who assesses which are the criteria, what makes you curious, what calls your attention in these works that are written for these prizes. I spent hours. I spent hours really intense and moving. But moving is a very condescendent word. I would say that those moments were lovely with students from different universities in Brazil that made their choices, choosing the 4 finalists of the last concours last year. And this is something ambiguous because they have to make this choice from this list that was created by the concours in France, and usually they are very criticized because you have the weight of the publishing houses. So when I knew that all these students have spent, I don't know, so many hours reading all these books in French, including many of them have more than 400 pages. So I thought that was impressive. And when we speak about this idea of the French Empire that was represented by the Concours Prize, but this issue of the prizes is always ambiguous because they are unfair to the extent that other are set apart, other books that could also deserve the same prize, the same recognition. However, it is important to shed light to literature, Journalists are interested, TV shows, and etc. They all turn to literature, to this art, full of senses, meanings. And I'm talking about friends without the prize, for even if it's really polemic, the same light wouldn't be shed to the books if there was no prize. It's some sort of collective passion in terms of literature in France. And for you, Luciana, how
livro que ele foi Prêmio São Paulo, que você ganhou, mas está no Jabuti, Oceanos, ou seja, um livro muito aceito por quem elabora essas listas, né? Como é para você observar isso, viver esse momento, que impacto isso tem na sua carreira, como você acredita que isso, de alguma forma, é um balizador?
Tudo que eu vou poder dizer sobre isso está baseado no agora que está acontecendo agora, né? Então vai ser uma observação. É muito recente. O prêmio tem 2 dias, 2 dias, acho. Então é muito recente o que aconteceu. Eu estou entendendo ainda, mas o que eu posso falar sobre o prêmio, a existência dos prêmios na cena literária prêmios têm sustentado cenas literárias, né? Exatamente, o prêmio diz do que se lê, essa baliza durante muito tempo que tem feito. Tem muitos autores que fomos lendo a partir disso, desses prêmios. E eu acho que o prêmio ele marca um tempo, de algum jeito. Eu acho que a existência do prêmio não quer dizer que o livro não premiado não tenha tido ou não a validade, mas que existe um desejo do agora a pensar determinada escrita literária. Talvez essa seja uma possibilidade. E existe um anseio. Eu acho que o prêmio ele se compõe de quem está lendo, quem está escrevendo sobre a cena literária, né? Quem está lendo, quem está escrevendo sobre, quem está escrevendo sobre o livro, quem está lendo e o livro, a obra em si. Então, eu acho que esses 3 elementos se refletem no prêmio no desenho do cenário contemporâneo. Então, eu acho que o prêmio faz esse desenho desse cenário contemporâneo, o que diz de um desejo de uma época, talvez. É claro que é complexo, porque as pessoas que estão fazendo aquela seleção, diversas questões e nuances diferentes podem acontecer ali. Então, eu acho que é isso, é um tema complexo, mas eu acho que bom que ele exista, porque eu acho que é ampliador de campo de leitura. Eu acho que uma das funções de um prêmio literário é ampliar a leitura de determinadas coisas, de determinados livros, de determinadas histórias. E eu acho que nós temos histórias a contar. Eu acho que existe o interesse do mundo agora sobre o Brasil, isso é inegável, numa percepção de pensar a estrutura de várias questões. Eu acho que nós renovamos, trazemos um ar fresco para pensar diferentes questões no mundo. E se a gente pensa no Brasil, a Bahia fez isso também. Eu acho que a Bahia ela oferece um ar fresco para pensar o Brasil. É um excelente ponto de começo para pensar o Brasil. Então, nós temos muitas histórias na Bahia para contar. O Brasil tem muita história para contar ao mundo. E tem alguma coisa que a gente está fazendo aqui há muito tempo, mas que agora existe um público leitor, não só no Brasil, que está muito interessado no que a gente está fazendo e no que a gente está dizendo. E tem também uma crítica literária que está muito interessada no que a gente está fazendo e no que a gente está dizendo, porque, enfim, são movimentos do tempo. Eu, obviamente, estou feliz com o prêmio, porque é a construção de uma carreira literária. Não é simples construir uma carreira literária quando se está em zonas de fronteira, como eu estou,
como Eliane está, né?
Isso, exatamente. Então, nesse momento é revolucionário. Eu e Eliane estávamos...
Marx.
Eliane Marx. Estávamos sentadas uma do lado da outra, ela venceu a categoria romance de estreia e quando saiu, eu fiquei muito feliz e esqueci de acompanhar o jogo ali, o prêmio, enfim. Mas a gente ficou muito feliz, eu sou leitora. Imagina que eu tive a grande honra de ser a leitora de um romance que vi ser premiado na minha frente. Eu sou leitora de Louças de Família, amei o livro, levo para a sala de aula, levo para as minhas disciplinas, e eu estava no momento que esse livro foi premiado. Eu abracei a autora, ficamos felizes juntas. Foi um momento de alegria imensa e a gente, enfim, é uma cena inédita no Brasil. Isso a gente tem que dizer, né? O grande choque é esse. É inédito e é bizarro, é constrangedor isso ser uma grande cena, porque não era para ser. Não era para ser estranho a gente ver mulheres sendo premiadas, mulheres negras fora do eixo Rio-São Paulo, mulheres negras sendo premiadas, não era estranho.
Que horas são essas na história do mundo,
Exatamente, né? Que hora é essa para isso estar acontecendo agora? Então é constrangedor esse choque. O choque, a percepção da gente pensar assim, uau, nunca vi.
When we think about, wow, it has never happened, I never seen Black women receive this prize, it's really embarrassing. So what can we do with this embarrassment? Something we have to do. We are elaborating intellectualism in the world, and it doesn't matter what you're writing. It says of the fact that you are breathing, you are loving. We love. We are mad at the world. We breathe. This is the elaboration of thoughts, the way you write. So what are we going to do with these embarrassments? Because we realize that these things never happen. I think this is what the movement that these prizes do. Maybe we wouldn't have thought about it if we didn't have this prize. And the text amplifies the possibility of reading, of course. So, borders. There is another border that I think our works go through it. And they overcome these borders, which I think the arts themselves. Conceição Evaristo has a prize that inspires the next Arts Biennial, where you have works in theater. You had a PhD based on theatrical language. To which extent these other works, these other artistic manifestations contaminate what you write? Well, I'm really contaminated, I don't know, maybe influenced, maybe, by the cinema, which is an art that counts so much to me, just as literature or photography, and all the works, graphics or pictorial, for all that I see and I find beautiful. All of this fulfills me, but I also suffer the influence of what I write. So as a writer, I know that my aspiration is, and the absence of, for her, she's filled of whatever I see, whatever I do, everything I find, everything I go through. She is made of everything that constitutes life. And arts, obviously, art is part of life, for sure. Photography, undoubtedly. I like to write and dialogue with other arts. For instance, I have a work that's called Macala, where I dialogue with the photography of Marc Ferrex in the end of the 19th century. The idea is that these are photographs that have a title of Black Women in Bahia. So I have Macala, this text. And I've been for a long time talking to this photography, how the body of the woman escaped when was photographed, because this photographer is hard to create this scene that the slavery in Brazil was okay. Look how women are so beautiful and organized in the image of the slavery. So I was looking at the jewels, the fabric she was using, all the elements that could point to which religious groups the women belonged to. So I researched a lot on it, and I was creating a letter, just as if that woman had been kidnapped as a baby and she could not say goodbye to her mother. So the letter is a goodbye letter to her mother. Just as if in a day she had been kidnapped and the ending she didn't have, time for it. So I was researching in theater based on two elements: the crime process of a woman in Recôncavo da Bahia, in Cachoeira, in a testament of another woman from the MENA region in the African continent, currently Benin. So I put these two elements together and I make a research on the possible languages. I use elements of the language. Makala means something hot, very hot. So she has a fist, a closed fist in the image. So I try to elaborate on that. And plastic arts too. There is a visual artist that I love, Rosales. So I write and dialogue with her. It's the cover of my book Matador. It's the image of this artist. So sometimes I get this image and I elaborate a text from that, from that image. Many things serve. I'm reading a thesis now that is being the argument of my new novel. A very frustrated historian trying to reach history somehow. So I'm always dialoguing with arts and theater. Fond of Gracie Pasok, with a scientist of theater, and I also have actresses, film writers, playwriters, and she's very touching. Her texts are touching, are moving, and I love theater. And theater inspires me. Dance, all my texts have many dialogues with other arts. This encounter between arts that helps me think about the character, the rhythm of the book. I decide in my book if the position of the narrator, if it's linear or not. And there is a song that is called Morte do Vaqueiro of Luiz Gonzaga. It defined my character Schuller in my book. So I was always dialoguing with this song when writing about her. And the person doesn't need to know, the reader doesn't need to know that, because this is my paranoia, this writing maps. Oh, the person who reads doesn't need to know about it. This is how this inspires me to create this music of Luis Gonzaga. It's incredible. And he designs this dog, a fantastic dog, and it's weird how it's fantastic how he creates this reflection of Brazil. And I elaborated the character from a song. This is what art makes possible for us. So I start to write so much from this meeting, this encounter, and poetry also fits my narrative. Epígrafe de Mata Doce is a poem from Drummond. So I established these transits between arts. I think art is necessary for us to survive. Wonderful. So we have to talk a lot. We have lots of things to say one to the other. Marie, to conclude, I saw your declaration saying that you are on hair of a woman. When I visited the opera house in Paris, that theater where Mulher died, I was scared with that. I was imagining that scene and he dying. He was dead, you know. It was so interesting. You say you are a hair of Mulher, and I want to know to which extent. And why you don't see yourself as an intellectual, a thinker of your time? Or do you see yourself like this? I'm not precisely a hearer of Molière, but only in terms of language. The themes of his plays, yes, some sort of here in the sense that the language formed me without even when I was not conscious of it. When I was a child, I am of a generation in which early, starting with 10 years old, we used to study Molière plays. You don't do this now because they are considered a little bit hard to read, you know. But I think that when the Comédie Française, the theater you went to in Paris, and yes, I had the opportunity, I had the great honor to have a play performed there in that theater. And at that time, I was the first woman alive to be interpreted, to have a play performed in that theater. So it was really funny and some sort of sad in the sense that it happened so late. But you see that nobody in France would have said that I was the first person alive, woman alive, black woman, because you cannot say that in France, you know. I was just the first woman alive to be represented in this theater. And about intellectuality, it is tied necessarily to the academic matter, what it is to be intellectual today. When I say I'm not an intellectual, it's because I didn't study in university. I stopped after the national exam for the university. And it means that I don't have the tools, I don't have, how can I say, the formation of the spirit authorizes me to say that I am an intellectual, since I didn't learn letters as you learn in university. And you, I'm here with the translation. And you, Luciane, what's it to be an intellectual? You know, to conclude, very easy question. It's not simple. It's not a simple question. I think that being an intellectual is to be simple. And be calm and simple. Because I think there is this imaginary in society that intellectually is tied to arrogance, tied to a detachment of life. And sometimes you create narratives against it and these separations. I think intellectuality is not only in university. I think this is a prejudgment, you know. When I said before, when you think the writing, when you write, you think of the narrative, you narrate the existence, the choices we make. This is an intellectual movement. I'm gonna eat this or that. I'm gonna go to this place, not to the other. This speaks to mobilizations, to intellectualities, and places where that I think we can access and activate and mobilize these thoughts and structures. And from this perspective, I think it's important to think about this in a broader sense so that we can defend our intellectuality that is built in other spaces, not only the ones that are appointed by the hegemonic narratives. We have hegemonic thoughts that define what things are, and there is a broader and sophisticated understanding of what is life. There's an intuition that a person might have and tell you, and that intuition might have might cause a reflection of your existence. This is being intellectual. This is a learning process of how to access sensibility places. I think when you think about sensibility, about intellectuality, you think about very diversified places. For instance, if I go again, if I in Matador, I have some characters that are mourning, and they resolve the mourning when they see the flight of the blue auroras. The auroras are flying, and they see it in the sunrise, and from that moment on, this character understands the relation, the mourning side of him is resolved. This is something intellectual, how we dialogue with our feelings in contact with nature. I think we have so many tools for reading the world that are creating our intellectuality. And what would be an intellectually complete? It would be like understanding it as an epistemology, understanding of the world. One thing does not eliminate the other. I come from a countryside, and women there position themselves as I follow a very strong matriarchy. And someone told me that that would not be intellectual, and it was a shock for me. I took some time to make this association, so I will always defend more broadened thought and autonomous, because we have to be autonomous in our decisions about our body, our desires. All of this is intellectuality, undoubtedly. Literature is to access later intellectual. Everyone who access literature are writing together with the author. People say that my book is amazing, and that's it. Reading is a very absurd place of creating creating intellectualities. If the person writes a book, this writer is an intellectual, regardless of the journey. And to read is amazing. The ones who read, they invent literature. Well, I made this question because I posed it because I consider it a big issue in our contemporary world. A lot because of the social media and the spread of many ideas and thoughts, ideologies. I think we have so much information that we are not able to digest what we consume, and we do not elaborate our own thought about what we are consuming. And since we are writers, how do we deal with this imagination, confabulation? I think we have a chance, beautiful chance, and interesting to provoke this coming out of this place where you can only receive and repeat, receive and repeat. I think literature is just this place, and arts in general, or this place where you can, go, wow, you can finally look to life through other lens. And for me, this is what an intellectual does. And one of our greatest intellectuals is a man called Nego Bispo, died 1 year ago. He was a quilombola, a person who didn't go to formal school. But I never seen someone saying with so much assertiveness and about who he is. He has the real perception of what he is, who he is. And with so, I'd like to thank you for producing literature, producing art, for being each of you in your countries and places, some with some differences in terms of trajectory, but producing, yes, knowledge and new forms of perceiving the world. And to finalize, I'd like Marie and Luciani to say what you want this public, this audience to learn and apprehend from your literature. I am here to make simple questions, to pose simple questions. I'd like you, first of all, I am always talking about from this autonomy place. I think this is a good principle. And let's use literature in the game of life in your week. And again, if I'm talking about a lot about my last book, and every time we write, I think this is normal. When I wrote Mata Doce, I had one desire. I want these people to fall in love for these women. I want people to love two women that decide to adopt a child. And so this was my desire, I don't know if that works in a text, but I desired this, that people could access this place of love for these bodies that are not always loved. And of course, if they could, give themselves to this game of memory. This book has a non-linear narrative. You have to have this predisposition of dancing, of putting yourself in a lecture and move on. I think that what I want is to create imaginaries. So you have to read. Let's read women. Let's read Black women, because we have an issue that is being pointed by the books that has to do with this accessing the language. We have to be aware of it. I think that a life without literature can be a good life, happy one, and satisfactory, but it will never be a life so broad and so enriching and so diversified as a life in which literature has a place. Literature amplifies our lives, helps our lives not to be what they helps our life not to be so boring or ordinary. Then our lives become extraordinary with whatever might happen in our daily lives. So literature improves, amplifies our lives in a sense that only art can. Thank you. And I'd like to also thank our translators. Thank you for being here with us. Que bom que ela lembrou de agradecer, gente. Alguém lembrou. Se é Cláudio, salva automaticamente.